Hello, my name is Lauren Wood, class of 2006, and I serve the college as the coordinator for Alumni and Family Relations and President's Office Support. On behalf of the college, I welcome each of you to the series NOKELive presented by the Roanoke College Alumni Association. This event is being recorded and will be available on this Roanoke College Alumni YouTube channel for future viewing. Please feel free to share your comments and ask questions during the event using the YouTube chat feature. Tonight's event is called NOKELive, Undergraduate Research at Roanoke College, a showcase sample. When you think of undergraduate research, you might picture a lab full of science students, or maybe someone writing a paper in the library. But at Roanoke College, it can be much more than that. It's a chance for students to become explorers in any topic they are passionate about. And tonight, we're going to learn more about this incredible program from its current director and Roanoke College faculty member, Dr. Chris Lassiter, as well as 3 students who completed their research this summer. Dr. Lassiter received his undergraduate degree in biology from Furman University. He graduated from Duke with a PhD in genetics in 2005. That same year, Chris arrived at Roanoke College. He teaches embryology, cell biology, and immunology. He also teaches a travel course on national parks, taking students to the Southwest Desert. He is the advisor for the Biology Club and runs an active research lab with students here at the college. He received the Dean's Award for Excellence in Teaching in 2010 and the Dean's Award for Excellence in Service in 2018. He is currently Professor of Biology and the Director of Undergraduate Research for the college. Good evening, Chris, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Lauren. I'm looking forward to telling our audience about undergraduate research at the college. I've got a little bit of a presentation that I'll do, but I really want to focus on the students that will be speaking after me. They have done excellent research this summer, and they're just a sample of what was done this summer at the college. It was so nice to have summer research back up and running this year, since we weren't able to do that in 2020. So did my heart good to see all the activity. So let me get my presentation going here. Okay. All right. So my presentation is undergraduate research at Roanoke College, that we are pushing knowledge forward. And before I get into research, I just wanted to set the stage. Research is just one small part of experiential learning, learning through experiences that we have at the college. So experiential learning is engaging students in these real world situations outside the classroom typically. And there are 5 areas of that at the college. Research is just one of those. It's the one that I deal with most often, but it includes the artistic and creative works, which fall underneath research as well. Internships, so going off campus or on campus internships. Study away, that can include study abroad, as well as something like our Washington, D.C. semester. And service learning, which is usually in the context of a course. So research is what I'm going to focus on this evening. What do we hope to achieve through research and through all these experiential learning activities? Well, it's helpful to look at our college's mission. It's to prepare students for responsible lives of learning, service, and leadership by promoting intellectual, ethical, spiritual, and personal growth. And I think research can do that. It's producing educated, responsible citizens that engage with their communities. Doing research, doing experiential learning, allows students to get out in the world and look at learning, at service, at leadership as they're doing their research, growing intellectually, thinking about the ethics of their research. So it's a way to engage with these ideas. So Lauren's already hinted a bit about this, but when I talk to students, I'll go into freshman classes sometimes and say, well, what is research? And I get back, well, it's an old white guy in a lab coat and goggles. And it's like, no, that is not research. Research is more than science. It's more than white. It's more than men. It's everybody, right? So it's all the disciplines on campus. All the students can get involved in research. So the humanities have active research on campus. The history department, the religion and philosophy department have students doing research. The social sciences, psychology, sociology, education, business, they all have students doing research. And yes, the sciences as well. So math, computer science, physics, biology, chemistry. And we're doing research. And when you look across campus, every major has research opportunities for students. And you're going to see that through the students that talk this evening. As I'm talking with students and with parents and others about why you should do research at the college, because there's a lot of opportunities when you enroll at Roanoke College. You can go to study abroad. You can participate in athletics. You know, why should you spend some of your time doing research? Well, there's sort of the high-minded goals of research. It's the scholarly pursuit of knowledge. You are on the edge of what is known. If you think of all of human knowledge as a circle, you're pushing that circle. You're making it just a little bit bigger so that we know more about the human condition, whether that's in the humanities, looking at history, looking at English, or whether you're in the sciences. So whatever it is, you're trying to enrich the human condition and learn a little bit more about it. And I think liberal arts education, what we do at Roanoke College, works best when you educate the head, the heart, and the hands. And research does that. You're not just engaging with the material intellectually, you're engaging with it with your heart. You're passionate about research that you really get involved in, and your hands, whether you're at a research bench or you're in the library or you're out in the field doing interviews for a sociology project. And it's a way to engage the whole person. There's also the more practical aspects of doing research. Getting skills that professional and graduate programs are looking for, as well as employers. They are looking for students that can take on projects and see them through and know that you hit road bumps sometimes, and how do you deal with those? Research lets students get practice in those skills. There's the resume building aspect of it, giving presentations at conferences. We have students going to local, regional, and national conferences. And not all students get published, but we do have undergraduates who are publishing primary literature in journals of their discipline. And finally, you get this strong relationship with the faculty mentor, and that helps for those letters of recommendation. Now, the students that work in my research lab, I do embryonic development, genetic engineering, and toxicology with zebrafish as a model system. And those students that work in my lab, I get to know them really well. And so when it's time to write those letters of recommendation for graduate school, for medical school, for employers, I can write in depth about how that student has worked on projects and overcome difficulties. I often have students and parents ask me, what makes Roanoke College distinctive about its research? And one thing that we share with other undergraduate-only institutions is that access to faculty, and of course, being the small size that we are, we don't have graduate students and the faculty are readily accessible. So that means when I have students working in my research lab, there are no graduate students. Those students are doing the work that leads to those conference presentations and those publications. We also have programs. You're going to hear about the Summer Scholars Program in just a minute, and we're going to have summer scholars talk to us. But we also have a program called Research Fellows. Research Fellows identify students during the senior year of high school, and they don't do research during their senior year of high school with us, but we identify those students and they come in and start doing research as freshmen. Admissions sometimes will say, you can start your research the day you get here. And I tell the students, well, you probably want to move into the dorms first and get settled in, but yeah, your first week, you can start then. We also have a program on campus that pays students to work in the research labs, the Work Study Research Assistant Program. This has become more popular over the past decade. We've been doing it a little bit longer than that, I believe, might be slightly over a decade. So we were one of the early adopters of this program, and it's been fantastic in getting students involved in research where they don't want to get course credit, but they can get pay. And finally, our honors program. Honors students propose and carry out multi-semester projects. And so all of the honors students end up getting involved in research at some point, typically toward their junior and senior year, sometimes even earlier. We get students with national recognition. Ben Walker, who did research in my laboratory, was published twice while an undergraduate. He had his name on scientific articles. And another student that worked near me, not in my lab, had a nice quote. They gave me a key to the room. She was using a $250,000 microscope. And at many institutions, freshmen and sophomores would not have access to a $250,000 microscope. But at Roanoke College, we train you on it, give you the key to the room if you are going to be using that equipment. And so once she was comfortable with it, she was operating it on her own. Research at the college is kind of broken down into two main areas in terms of the programs that are available. Semester research is during the academic semesters, and students can start as early as freshman year. Most start their sophomore or junior year, mainly because that first semester freshman year, you're kind of learning your way around higher education, right? Making that transition from high school to college. But I do have students that will start their first semester. As I already mentioned, students can do course credit or they can do the paid position. So there's two options available there. And they can get financial support to help out. We have programs that give students $500 of money for the project. That could be supply money. It could be money to help pay participants in a study. So it can be used for all sorts of techniques. And we also have a travel fund. Most schools our size don't have a very large travel fund to support students going to conferences. And we are lucky that we do have a fund that allows that to happen. And we send typically around 75 to 100 students every year to conferences. Finally, our honors students have access to distinction project funding, which is for their big honors project. And that can be used for travel and support for the project. The summer research that you're going to hear about tonight are summer scholars. Summer scholars is our cream of the crop elite summer research program. It's very competitive. Students submit applications. Those applications are reviewed by a committee of faculty. And the students that are awarded that, which you'll see tonight, they get $3,000 summer stipend. They get free housing for the summer, and they get a free course credit. In addition, they get social opportunities during the summer and educational workshops. Those range from how to put together posters for conferences to resumes. How do you work on resumes? But they're not the only students doing summer research. There are usually 10 to 13 summer scholars. We often have about 50 students doing research on campus. And a lot of those are paid through the various departments. They typically get paid the same $3,000, and the free housing, the course credit sometimes is there, sometimes not. And they can take advantage of those same social opportunities and educational workshops. Only some departments have this. I'm trying to increase the number of departments that have funds for departmental summer research. And then usually 5 to 10 students go off campus and do research experience for undergraduates, which is a National Science Foundation program, or some similar program. So they're going off to large research universities. Again, about 5 to 10 students do that each summer. What are the outcomes? What do we get out of this research? Well, the number of scholarships and fellowships of the college has gone up over the past 15 years, and almost all of those students are involved in research in some way. That's not the only thing they're doing, but that's part of the story that helps them get those awards. And they're going off to graduate and medical schools. The student you see on the right at the top, Seth, is actually in an MD PhD program, getting a double doctorate right now. And the research that was done at Roanoke College helped him get into that position. We get publications. You can see the chemistry publication that's on the right-hand side of your screen. I'm sure I will not pronounce it properly, but you can see it. The one below it is out of my own lab. I can say those words. Modulation of estrogen causes disruption of craniofacial chondrogenesis in Danio rario. That's the zebrafish model that I study. But if you look at the names underneath the titles, all of the names are students except for the last name. So we've got Dr. Johan and we've got myself as last authors. We're putting the students first on these publications, and that helps their resumes. It's not exactly a Wonka's golden ticket to graduate school, but it definitely helps. And of course, going to conferences, networking with others in your field and your discipline, and getting those professional presentation skills. We have more students go to conferences than get on the publications, just because, well, if you're on the cutting edge of research, sometimes it doesn't end up leading to a publication, but often it can lead to a conference presentation. Just to give you an idea of some recent events, we've had 2 students present to Congress at Posters on the Hill in 2019 and in 2020. And we were the only small liberal arts college to have students go back to back in those years. Only about 50 to 60 students are selected from across the country. So to get selected twice in a row is very unusual. I think it speaks to the quality of research we have going on. I also mentioned we've got around 50 doing summer research at the college. It's typically around 300 doing research during the academic year. Now, recent conference travel, of course, has been suspended. So the conference numbers have been a little odd. But if I go back to 2019, 2020, over 75 students. And typically it's about 100 if I go back even further than that. And I believe we'll see that again, hopefully soon. And in terms of those paid positions, over 70 students are working with faculty doing research and pay. So we'll have time at the end for questions. So if you have questions about undergraduate research programs, you can ask me, but we'll also have time that you can ask students about the research they're doing. So we have 3 student presenters, Isabella Moritz, who worked with Dr. Warden in fine arts, Jake Beardsley, who worked with Dr. Childers in math, and Benjamin Campbell, who worked with Dr. Finley Van Nostrand in psychology. And I'm going to introduce the speakers, and then I'll step back and let them have at it, because their stories are more interesting than mine. Right? They're going to tell you what they spent the summer doing. So let me introduce Isabella Moritz. Isabella Moritz is an art history major with minors in studio art and French. and concentrations in anthropology and public history. Her research project is titled The Weight of Power, Dressing Ancient Royalty in Life and in Death. Isabella hopes to go on to work in archaeology and museums with the plan to eventually attend graduate school for museum science after attending archaeological field school. In her spare time at Roanoke College over the last 3 years, she has been vice president of the Roanoke's a cappella group, a lead in a musical, a member of both the treble and the mixed choirs, worked in the Fine Arts Administration Office, and is a peer mentor for incoming freshmen, and served on both the Student Conduct Council and the Council of Academic Integrity. So it's my pleasure to hand this off to Isabella.
Hello, as he mentioned, I am doing all of these things, and part of the research that I do at Roanoke is not just summer scholars, which is what I'm going to talk about, but I am also in my second year of being a research assistant in the archaeology ceramics lab under Dr. Borden as well. So one of the big benefits of my project for me, as we are in this pandemic world, is that not only did I get to do the paid research of my own design, but I also got to receive course credit that replaced my intensive learning or May term requirement for graduation, as I've had 3 of those get canceled. So there was a convenience aspect to that, and you can advance to the next slide. This project was coming into fruition for a couple of years now. And the text that you see there, that is, it corresponds to the text in the exhibit, that large block. So 2 years ago now, I was a little sophomore and I was in my first archaeology class. And my professor, Dr. Warden, displayed an image of the funerary garments of an ancient Sumerian queen, Puabi. And I saw it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the coolest costume ever. How can I do this? Maybe for Halloween or some other historical event. As we got closer to actually making this become a project that I did, it became less of an aesthetic recreation of the garment and more of a recreation based on some sort of archaeological evidence. So the approach that I employed for my project was one called experimental archaeology, in which data that is archaeological in nature is produced through trial and through experimentation. The other thing really appealing about this for me was that because I wanted to work with something that was a garment that would have been worn, I was working with something that is universally human, which is something that goes on the body. And that informed a lot of my approach and a lot of my exhibit design as well. Next slide, please. So here is the final project and my final conclusion. Once I submitted my application for the Summer Scholars Program and titled my work The Weight of Power, the project kind of took on a life of its own. I don't know that I was specifically heading in the direction of weight at first, but then it became clear that my hypothesis was going to be, is this garment too heavy to have been worn by a living person or the Queen Puabi when she was alive? Because the garments were found on her body in her burial. And those are two very different archaeological contexts that inform different uses and different understandings of the garment. So my decision to test this involved me actually taking the physical skills that I have as a serial hobbyist and actually producing a garment that could be worn in order to test how it feels to wear and what that says about power, what it says about femininity in the ancient world, and also a chance for me to grow as a researcher. Something really, really wonderful that happened as part of the research process is that the museum where the garments are housed today, the actual garments, which you can kind of see in the little picture down in the corner of my exhibit pictured here, is that they're housed at the Penn Museum in Philadelphia. And my advisor, Dr. Worden, is an alma mater of that institution. And she works in ancient world archaeology. So she had connections to set me up to talk with the current keeper of the ancient Near Eastern collections at the Penn Museum, Katie Blanchard. And we were able to have a wonderful, wonderful Zoom interview about museums and careers in museums and considerations for exhibitions and thinking about how things go on the body and what that does and how it changes the way that you have to display things, and also just getting to talk to someone in the field and build those connections. If you could advance, please. So there were three main steps to my project. The first one was research, 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 lots and lots of reading, trying to get an understanding of the broader cultural context in which this original garment would have been situated. So this is 5,000 years ago in modern day Iraq, was the civilization of the Sumerian civilization of Ur. And from Ur at their royal cemetery, which was excavated in the 1920s, we have this data. So part of that was researching the cultural context, but then I turned to the work of other scholars, including Dr. Aubrey Bodsgard, and her dissertation published the weights and counts of all of the garments, all of the different pieces of the garment as they are currently displayed. So the next step of my project was making decisions about material choices. If I can't be true to the aesthetics, I have to be true to the weight. So the cloak pictured here and each of the accessories, I decided to work from everything from the neck down. All of this was reconstructed, and you can kind of see the iterations of this in this photo of weighing, counting, stringing, and ordering all these beads before they get hand sewn to the garment to be within 0.1 grams of the actual weight of the measured strand or of the measured accessory. So 0.1 grams is maybe about 2 grains of rice. So that's really, really close. And that attention to accuracy with the weight guided my project as well. If you could advance for me. Part of my research also included looking at archaeological evidence. Part of the archaeological evidence was looking at the visual record. So here you can see a cylinder seal that has the only image of Puabi that we have. And it's the only image of Puabi that's labeled as Puabi. And it was found with her body. But also part of my archaeological evidence analysis was going through hundreds of pages of notes from the excavator in the 1920s and transcribing them and getting a sense of how he interpreted that, which is more accurate than something that is interpreting from reconstruction, because you're interpreting from the original context. Get it advance for me. This is just an image of where everything was found, what's called in situ, or where it was left in antiquity. And as you can see, that large square is all of the beads as they were found by the excavator. So all of this reconstruction is post-excavation work. And so that's really what I was working on, is not how do I make these materials, but how do I reconstruct them after the fact. If you could advance for me. So this poster here, I actually just presented this past Friday at the showcase. I placed second. And what I wanted to showcase with this was my process. So the different stages that I went through of constructing this, because there were choices to be made about beads, there were choices to be made about textiles, and what evidence I would use to support that. And also part of that was the actual step-by-step process of designing and installing my exhibit, which is currently in the library, the Fintel library on campus, and it will be up for all of the fall semester. And the exhibit is the product of my research from this summer. Instead of producing a paper, I was producing an exhibit. What helped me in this, it was kind of a dual thing, is that from this, I learned about myself, kind of what the next steps I want to go in as far as my potential career, as well as an idea of next steps for this project. Because the result of my research was that based on weight, this garment is not unwearable by a living person. It's actually kind of comfortable as a garment can be that's quite heavy. And the total weight of the beads of the things that I reconstructed only came out to being about 5 pounds. So because no other scholars had actually thought, let's make this and try it on to see if it's wearable or not, I've taken a unique approach that has yielded a very different conclusion than the assumption that the field has been operating on thus far. If you can advance. Thank you. So here you can also see the larger photo of the original garment side by side with garments that I produced this summer. So because my findings were very different from what I expected, I will be hopefully doing honors in the major of art history in this spring to publish my findings in a paper format and submit for peer review and potential publication with journals that are in the field. It also helped me figure out that what my niche interest is in museums is working with three-dimensional objects and, if possible, historical garments as three-dimensional objects. And that will include hopefully attending grad school to get a master's in either textile or fashion conservation or museum studies. The most important thing that I got about this was that I never, ever imagined that I would be able to do a project like this. And not only a project like this, but a project that I designed myself, and certainly not at this scale, and certainly not for publication at an undergraduate level. And so that is something so unique about Roanoke that I will be forever grateful for, is not only the opportunity to do this, but also the funding, because this was a really materials heavy project. And so getting to do this at the level that I was able to produce is incredibly unique, because Roanoke had the resources to support me in that. Also, I learned a lot about myself. This was a really transitional summer, coming from junior into senior year and figuring out next steps, and also coming out of a pandemic and learning how to be really assertive and confident in myself and my knowledge, not being so dependent on external validation, and an understanding of myself and my career interests going forward. That has really helped me be grounded as I go into this last year at the school. And I believe that's all I have for you. I am leaving now to attend rehearsal for another musical. But if you have any questions that are specific to me that I can answer for you, you can shoot me an email at my school email address, which is on the screen right now, and I will be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bella. I hope the rehearsal goes well tonight.
Thank you. Come see Into the Woods.
Yes, I definitely plan to. So for those of you that remember back to one of the first things I said, research is available in all the disciplines. You just saw an example of research in the humanities, and coming up, we've got research in the math and sciences and research in the social sciences as well. Our next speaker is Jake Beardsley. Jake is a math and economics major with a concentration in statistics at Roanoke. His research project is titled The Harden Effect, Quantifying the Impact of Fouls on NBA Game Outcomes. Jake's primary interests are in data analysis and game theory and their application to strategic action in sports and gaming. He is a member of Pi Mu Epsilon, the Math Honor Society, as well as a member of the Roanoke College Stat Crew, where he combines his passion for data analytics with his love of sports. Jake grew up playing the complex card game Magic the Gathering and enjoys playing now at a professional level. Jake also volunteers for gaming organizations and clubs to share his passion with children by giving game demos in his hometown of Bakersfield, California. So, Jake, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Lassiter. That was much too kind of an introduction. But hi, like Dr. Lassiter said, my name is Jake Beardsley. I've been a member of Roanoke Stat Crew since I was a freshman, and it was a large part of the reason I ended up coming to Roanoke to work with Dr. Childers and Dr. Mitten, looking at sports and math, which I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Moneyball, but in the last 15 to 20 years, that's really come into vogue. And it's certainly in baseball, but starting to branch out into other sports. And I'm looking today at basketball. So Dr. Lassiter, if you could move on to the next slide, and I'll give a little bit of background on my project. So the idea for this project, kind of like Bella had mentioned, starts for me as well in my sophomore year. And I was working a women's basketball game for the Stat Crew. We go to the game, we take down statistics, and we give reports to the coaches on what we can be doing better, what we did well, what we already did well. And it's about the second quarter in the game, late in the second quarter. It's a close game. And one of our players manages to draw 3 consecutive fouls, or get the best player on the opposing team to foul her on 3 possessions in a row. Now, in college basketball, if you commit 5 fouls, you get thrown out of the game. So, considering it was the other team's best player, their coach sat her. We ran away with the game. It wasn't a close game anymore. I think we ended up winning by like 15. So I'm watching this game and taking out the statistics for it, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I just watched something kind of interesting, that not just the free throws that our player got to shoot ended up being the most relevant part of the drawing those fouls. It was actually disrupting the opposing team. And my thought was, okay, is this something that can be numerically replicated at the professional level? Now, in the NBA, 6 fouls gets you thrown out, not 5. So it would theoretically have a slightly smaller impact. But there are players who have a reputation for being able to get other players to foul them quite frequently, which is the name of the project. For any NBA fans out there, James Harden is a polarizing player as far as the way he plays the game, but he certainly draws a lot of fouls. And I wanted to look at, okay, for him and other players like him, is the same thing that I saw at a D3 women's basketball game happening for big bad NBA players. And so in order to do this, I worked with every play from every game of the 2018-2019 season, which is, as some of you might be able to imagine, a very, very, very large data set. And to wrangle that, I used the industry standard RStudio programming language, which, I mean, the companies all the way up to Google and Apple and Microsoft, that's the way they do data analytics as well. So I was able to get fantastic hands-on experience working with what data analysts use at the professional level. And so I'm good for the next one. Thank you. So my initial question is, all right, what is the relationship between drawing fouls and winning games, right? I saw that there was this smaller, more niche relationship, but the initial question is, if you draw more fouls, do you win more games? And the conclusion is, it's a solid relationship. If you look at the graph there, we're looking at how many fouls a team manages to get the opposing team to commit over the course of a game and what their probability of winning is. So if we could move on to the next slide, I can give a little bit of a better breakdown than just the graph. So if you look at the graph, we've got a 20.73 average for fouls drawn in one game, which is where we've got this 50% win probability. And as you move up into 30 personal fouls drawn in a game, you're with a 58% win percentage, which is good for about 44 games won in a season, roughly, which is that's usually good enough to get you into the playoffs. So we're seeing that, okay, as we're managing to draw more fouls, we're winning an appreciable number of games. And if you can get all the way into the top tier of fouls drawn in a game, our model is predicting that you're going to be one of the best teams in the league. The Milwaukee Bucks, I think, were on track to hit about 50 wins last season if it was a full 82 game season, and they ended up winning the title and were one of the best teams in the league in the regular season as well. So looking at just from a baseline, does this work numerically at a general level? You get a pretty good sense that this is a good approach to take to trying to win games. So if I can move on to the next slide. The next trick is how do players measure up as far as drawing fouls individually? And so for this plot, I've broken it down by how many fouls a player draws in a game and what their player efficiency rating is, which is the NBA standard for how good is this player. There's a lot of different factors that go into it, both on the offensive and defensive ends, but it tries to distill how good is player A compared to player B. And what we see is there's certainly a little bit of a relationship here. We've got a big cluster down near the zero graph for just kind of your players who don't really get many minutes, and it kind of funnels out almost in like a curve shaped like this, which that is a useful thing to know, right? That there's a little bit of an increase that we see as far as how many fouls a player draws and how good they are generally speaking. I've broken it down by color as far as what a player's position is, because it gives it can kind of give us a sense. I don't know how well you can see it, but there are a lot more orange players that are scattered throughout the graph. That's the center position, which makes sense for anybody who's watched basketball. Centers are the biggest players that play the closest to the basket. And so they're going to naturally be the ones you have to foul more in order to actually disrupt them from scoring a basket because they're so close. And if you look down towards the bottom, there's a lot of green and purple, which are your smaller players that typically shoot further from the basket. So we can move on to the next one. And the actual result of what my project did when it came to fruition is I designed an entirely new basketball metric called the impact via drawing fouls, or IDF metric. And what that aims to do is build a statistic sort of like the player efficiency rating, but that distills how good a player is just based on their ability to draw fouls and their ability to convert that into something that scores points, stops the opponent, and wins the game ultimately. And the big way to distill that is the concept of a target foul. So, right, what our women's player did was she was able to target the opposing center and get her to foul her over and over again and get her into what's called foul trouble. And so putting it into the metric is I almost gave players extra credit for every time they were able to draw a foul on a player who had already fouled them in a game. So building this metric, the formula itself looks at how many free throws a player makes over the course of a season. It doesn't do you any good to get fouled the way maybe Shaquille O'Neal did if he doesn't make his free throws and it doesn't turn into points and you really didn't get anywhere. How many fouls a player draws overall in a season, it doesn't really make much sense to have a metric discussing how good a player is at drawing fouls without looking at how many fouls they draw. And finally, this concept of target extra credit, or the target difference, looking at how much more extra credit a player gets from drawing target fouls. Then I normalized for minutes, because not every NBA player plays the same amount of minutes over the course of the season. So it doesn't make sense to rate somebody who played over 2 games against somebody who played over 60 games using just total values. So what we can do with this metric is look at, do good players draw more fouls? Do good players draw more target fouls? And are good players the same people that are good players by the IDF metric? And so that brings us to the next slide, which is a similar graph to the one I had a couple slides ago, but instead of looking at how many fouls a player draws, it's looking at their IDF value and comparing it to their player efficiency rating. And what we can see is it's a much more linear relationship. It's a lot more one-to-one, which in statistics is really what we want. Looking at correlation values, this is about this is a 0.78 correlation coefficient. Not to get too bogged down in the math and for in normal people terms, I guess, it says that 78% of how good a player is by the player efficiency rating metric can be explained by a player's IDF metric, which is fantastic. That means that for most players, a lot of their overall value in a game, at least on the offensive end, can be tied back to this IDF metric and how effective they are at drawing fouls and converting those into points. And we'll bring us to the next one that gives you a little bit of a clearer look at that with a side-by-side comparison. If you look at the graph on the left, the graph on the left looking at drawn versus PER, it's not nearly as much of a straight line on the diagonal as the IDF versus the PER is, which is fantastic from a statistics researcher standpoint. Then to talk about kind of where I'm going with this is players like James Harden, who the project is named after. He had the third highest IDF metric in the league, and Giannis Antetokounmpo, who plays for the Bucks and won the Finals MVP, had the second highest IDF value in the league. Both of those players were pretty severely underrated coming out of college for Harden and out of Greece for Giannis. And so that kind of begs the question, is the IDF a potential way that we can look at Moneyball or drafting players that others might overlook or see as underrated? So going forward, over the course of this semester, the next semester, and ideally into graduate school, I will be building this IDF metric for more than just the 2019 season to look at how players' IDF values change over the course of their career and what their IDF values are coming out of college to see if maybe we're looking at players that are being undervalued. And so for my final slide, it kind of is going to talk about something similar to what Bella concluded her project with, and it's why do research? What do we gain out of it? And so, like Dr. Lassiter and Bella had both said, it's fantastic for both graduate and professional resumes, specifically in the fields of statistics, math, data science. All jobs love it if you're already familiar with lots of the computing tools and simulation tools that get used at the professional level. Stuff like RStudio, like I mentioned, or Python or SAS, or all these different coding languages that are really, really important to know. And knowing them from having done research with them already gives you a huge leg up, as well as graduate schools. It can't be overstated how valuable research is. For instance, I'm going to be looking at working with ideally the Harvard Sports Analytics Lab in graduate school. UVA also has a fantastic lab, and there's lots of places that value specifically even these pretty niche fields of research like sports analytics. And finally, it gives lots of hands-on experience. I spent all summer working with the same data and the same things to work with the data that, like I said, Google uses, that ESPN uses. And honestly, overall, it's a ton of fun. I've really loved my time with Stat Crew. I've loved my time at Roanoke, and I certainly have loved my time with the math department with Dr. Childers and Dr. Minton. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Lassiter. And if any of you have any questions after the talk, I'm happy to stick around and rant and rave about why James Harden should still be on the Houston Rockets.
Well, thank you so much, Jake. Yes, we will have question time at the end. So please ask questions about what I talked about, what Bella talked about, and Jake. And next we've got Ben. So I want to move on to introduce Ben to you. Again, if you've got questions, send them our way. Ben is a psych major with a concentration in gender studies here at Roanoke College. His research project is titled Effects of Elicited Jealousy on Masculinity and Relational Aggression in Men. Benjamin began his studies at Roanoke College in the spring semester of 2019. He's been working on Dr. Finley Van Nostrand's research team for over 3 semesters. His research interests are masculinity, relational aggression, and peer status in emerging adults. In his extracurriculars, Benjamin holds an executive position for the Roanoke College Psychology Association, is involved in intramural sports, and volunteers for the International Student Orientation. Benjamin is also a member of the Psi Chi Honor Society and the National Society of Leadership and Success. In his free time, Benjamin enjoys listening to music, going on hikes, being with friends, reading, and writing lyrical poetry. Benjamin's career goals include continuing research in graduate school and obtaining a PhD, working in inclusion and diversity training and/or family counseling. So with that, Benjamin, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Lassiter. So hi, everyone. I'm Ben. I'm a psychology major and with a concentration in gender studies, as Dr. Lassiter said. So I was fortunate enough to receive the Summer Scholars this summer and work on a project that I proposed called The Effects of Elicited Jealousy on Masculinity and Relational Aggression in Men. And just to start, like, one of the great things about this is I was able to kind of tie my major to my concentration because I'd been in a social developmental lab with Professor Finley Van Nostrand. And I haven't really been able to put in the gender component. So when I was able to apply with my own research proposal, I was very excited to add in the masculinity component because I've been looking at relational aggression, jealousy, and peer status so far over the past 3 years. Thank you. Okay, so just for a little background information about my study. So I'll first talk about masculinity. So I don't know if many people know this, but masculinity is a very social construct. It can kind of be compared to a popularity in the sense that masculinity for men is something that has to be achieved by showing off or proving your manhood by engaging in stereotypical male or masculine behaviors that could be seen as like fighting, drinking a lot of beer, having sex with multiple partners, those kinds of things. But it is also something that can be very easily lost if you are perceived as anything but masculine. So if you are engaging in any kind of stereotypical feminine behavior. So many men put a lot of emphasis on their masculinity and their feeling of manhood. And it has been found that when men feel less masculine, they actually use more overt aggression, which is physical aggression. So now tying in relational aggression, which is another form of aggression like overt aggression, but it's more social. And it is an indirect form that is meant to harm relationships with others. So this can be intentionally excluding someone from a peer group, talking behind people's backs, or just plain out ignoring someone because you don't want to talk to them and you're mad. So what I thought is, okay, if masculinity is so social, why hasn't it been studied with such a social form of aggression? And to my knowledge, this is the first time this study has, that these two components have been measured together. So then to elicit both of them, I was thinking, okay, what's an emotion that could elicit this? And it's actually been found before that jealousy, which is a very negative emotion, very negative and very social emotion, has elicited, friendship jealousy has elicited relational aggression, but looking at adolescence and not looking at how it relates to masculinity. So that was kind of the basis of my study. And then you can go to the next slide. So then for my hypothesis, what I suggested is that, okay, so if men feel jealous, then they're going to also feel less masculine and then use more relational aggression. And especially when they feel jealous in a friendship situation. So there were 3 main hypotheses going into the study, and that was that that men would feel more jealous, they would feel less masculine, and they would use more relational aggression towards a friend. So to do this study, I created an online survey using Qualtrics and then posted the link to Prolific, which is an online platform for participants to come in, get paid to participate in research studies. So I had a total of 151 emerging adults, so aged 18 to 25 males. They had to report that they identified as a male to be involved in the study. And you can go to the next slide. So for my methodology, and this is basically like how the survey was formatted, participants first started by completing a baseline measure of masculinity. So we had to create a lot of the methodology on our own because this has not really been researched before. So we literally just put, okay, how masculine do you feel, 0 to 100? And then also they reported on masculine contingency, which basically states that, or explains that men who would rate higher on that put a lot of emphasis on their masculinity, and like it explains their self-worth. Like they base a lot of their self-worth and their self-esteem on their feeling of masculinity or how they think others perceive them as being a man or their masculinity. So the participants completed both of those. Then they were randomly assigned into a jealousy or control condition. So and both of them read this hypothetical scenario. So in the jealousy condition, they went to a party with a friend. We asked them to think of a friend and write their name, and then the friend's name actually got funneled through to be put in all the text for the rest of the survey. So they're at this party with their friend, and in the jealousy condition, the friend immediately leaves them at the party for a female, and then continues the rest of the night to ignore them, and even when the participant approaches, kind of laughs them, like shuts them up, sends them off, and then ends up leaving the party with the female, leaving the participant alone. And then for the control condition, this was a much more neutral situation where the participant and friend show up to the party, they mingle with each other, they mingle with other people, they eventually leave together. So after they went through this manipulation, as we called it, they reported just some state emotions. So we asked them, how jealous do you feel? How angry do you feel? How happy do you feel? How threatened do you feel? And there were a couple other ones that were both positive and negative, just to get a sense of like what kind of emotions they were feeling after this. Then they again reported on their masculinity, same thing as before, 0 to 100. After this, to conclude the survey, they answered some questions about relational aggression use that they would use towards their friend that they went to the party with. So this was, how likely would you be to exclude your friend in the future? How likely would you be to talk behind your friend's back? How likely would you be to spread rumors? And then how likely would you be to ignore / avoid the friend in the future? And next slide. Okay, so the results for the study, the 3 main hypotheses were found. So men in the jealousy condition did end up reporting feeling more jealous, along with a lot of the, or more of the other negative emotions. So they felt more angry, they felt more threatened, they felt more distressed and uncomfortable. Men in the jealousy condition also felt less masculine than those in the control condition. And then men in the jealousy condition also used more relational aggression towards this friend than those in the control condition. So one other thing that we were looking for was if the manipulation, the hypothetical scenario itself actually caused a decrease in masculinity. So we compared the responses for those in the jealousy condition before and after on the 0 to 100 masculine scale. And there was a significant result, which is like, that's good, but it was a very small effect. And it was barely significant. So this is something that could be just a sample issue, like, a bigger sample size would make it more significant and give it a bigger effect. So this is something that to consider when looking into the future for follow-up study. And then these are just some statistics for what we found. And the Cohen's d is the effect size, so actually how much of a difference there was between the jealousy and control condition. And as you can see, there's a pretty big effect size for jealousy and relational aggression use, which means that those in the jealousy condition felt a lot more jealous and used a lot more relational aggression towards the friend than those in the control condition. So kind of to conclude, like I've already said, the results found that men in the jealousy condition reported using more relational aggression, they felt less masculine, and then they reported feeling more jealous along with the other negative emotions. So this suggests that friendship jealousy may act as a masculinity threat and also drive relational aggression use towards that friend. And I think, as I said in the beginning, this is the first study, to my knowledge, that's ever researched all of these variables together. Like relational aggression and jealousy have been researched together. Just aggression and masculinity have been researched together, but not all three. So that was a very exciting part of the study but also kind of scary, because going into it, I was like, well, what if none of this turns out the way that I think it will? But fortunately, it did. Oh, sorry, can you go back, please? Thank you. So just quickly, like this study, I think is very important because it hasn't been researched before. And it also highlights some real social consequences that may arise from men feeling jealous and also their masculinity threatened. And I think that it's important to, look into this and investigate this stuff, because so far it's been so focused on men only using physical aggression, but all types of aggression are bad and harmful towards the individual or peer group. So that's why I think it's very important that to study these variables. And then looking into the future, I am in my honors in the major project, and I will be doing that throughout the course of the whole year. I received funding this summer from the Psych-Hi International Honors Society for Psychology, so I have some more money to use since we have to pay the participants. So that's great, and that allows me to run many follow-up studies. So those could be incorporating new measures, tweaking the manipulation, because we would maybe like to take the female component out of it and instead maybe put a male peer in there. So meaning their friend would abandon them for another male peer instead of abandoning them for a female peer, just to make sure that there's no like romantic jealousy going on there. And then also adding in qualitative responses, because this was a complete quantitative study. So this could be, what I'm thinking is just at the end asking participants, like, how do you consider masculinity, or what do you feel like when you feel, or have you ever felt like your masculinity has been threatened, and could you describe that time? Just to, to see how men actually view masculinity or how they view themselves as men. So I'll conclude like the other two did with why research. I think for me personally, research has been the best thing that I've done in college so far. I love my courses. I love all my classes that I've taken. The professors are great, but I just really love research because I am so interested in it, and it feels like I'm making a change in this world. So as the first line says, it allows you to think critically outside of the classroom about issues that are actually happening in this world. So one thing that inspired this study was my interest in gender, but also my focus on researching, okay, how can I research toxic masculinity, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. So what way can I research this? So then also it helps you with reading and understanding empirical literature. And that is so important. Like I can't put enough emphasis on how important that is, especially during COVID, like this whole pandemic and all the misinformation that's being spread online. It's when you do research, you have to read articles that have been peer reviewed by others and actual science. So I think that getting a better understanding on how to read and interpret, analyze those is very helpful for just anything in life. It doesn't have to be just your studies or, graduate school. or you doing research on your own. And it also, I think the other two said this, allows hands-on experience. That has been great. I entered college knowing I wanted to do research. I didn't think that in my undergrad, I would actually be able to conduct my own study. I mean, that was awesome. And it creates a better understanding for data analysis and interpretation. And I know that this applies to most research, but not all. But one of the things that has come out of research for me is my love for statistics. And I mean, it's still growing, but I just had a day where it clicked for me and all of a sudden I understood it. And I just love going in like any statistical software I use. I usually use SPSS by IBM, and just looking at all the data and, checking which variables relating to what has an effect on what. And yeah, I love the numbers now. So that was great. And then also, and Dr. Lassiter said this earlier, it allows students to create a stronger relationships with professors. And this could be for graduate school, letters of recommendation, those are very important. But also personally, I feel like that's one of the biggest benefits out of doing research is that my professor and I are so close now. And we don't even I can go to her office and we don't even have to talk about research. We can talk about whatever. I mean, most of the time it is about research or psychology, but I just love how I have a mentor and someone to help guide me throughout my studies here. And we have many common interests, so that's awesome and great because I can express all of what I found and what I think is super interesting, and then she can do the same. So yeah, and I guess I'll stick around for a couple more minutes if anyone has questions for me, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm just going to leave this up on the screen here as we go to questions. For my piece, we do have a website, rcresearch.org, and we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, where you can see student projects, and we post about those on social media. So we're looking forward to taking questions.
All right, so I'm going to kick things off, actually. So first, thank you all so much for being here this evening. It's incredible work that you are all doing. And it's just really, it's been really interesting for me to listen to all the different projects and to see what some of our students are doing while they're here on campus. So first, this question will be both for Jake and for Ben. What was an unexpected moment that happened during your research? And Jake, I'll start with you.
Okay, sure. So the biggest one for me, I think, was I had done some amount of research on sports analytics before, but what really kind of surprised me was how non-linear the progression of my project was. That I remember I had started working on it in May, and I remember even by late July, I was like, I don't have nearly the results I thought I would after almost 2 months at this point. And I talked to my advisor, Dr. Childers. He's like, oh yeah, no, stats research is like a hockey stick. It's like nothing. Oh, now we're done. And he was right. Within a week and a half of me going into his office saying, what's going on? I don't feel like I've done anything this summer. Oh, now I have my metric. Now I have my results. Now I have something I can present. And so that was the thing that was the most surprising for me, at least.
Okay. And what about you, Ben? What was the most surprising thing that you kind of discovered throughout your research?
I mean, I definitely have to agree that the moment where it's like, oh, wow, I have something that I can use. Yeah, I mean, because I created so many of these measures with my professor, and we only used 2 or 3 prior measures that were already used in other past studies. So just hoping that these were going to work out and it actually was going to measure what we wanted to. And then when I sent out the survey, got all my data back, and when I was analyzing it, seeing that, wow, this actually did have the effect that I expected was very surprising, but also very encouraging.
And so, Dr. Lassiter, I have a question for you next. Can you tell us a little bit about how research has changed at Roanoke College, and then also kind of what you maybe expect the future of the program to look like?
Yeah, I think I've been director of undergrad research for about 8 years, but the position existed before me. But over the course of the 15 years that I've been at the college, I have seen a dramatic increase in the amount of undergraduate research going on. You might have had a professor working with 1 or 2 students, and now you're seeing professors working with larger groups of students, helping students mentor other students. So I might have a senior working with a freshman, for example. And so I have seen an increase, not just in the sciences where I'm based, but across campus. And so that's been fantastic. And a lot of that's because we've got faculty coming in that are really excited about engaging undergraduates in research over the years. And I think where we're headed, it's interesting. I think about this because running the Office of Undergrad Research, we can't have every single student do research. It would dilute the quality in terms of, like, I can't take on infinite number of students. It wouldn't be good for the students doing research in my lab. But I think we will continue to see an increase in those experiences. They're going to plateau at some point, but ensuring that they're of high quality, that's part of the Pathways program that I mentioned very, very briefly, is having student reflection being a part of the piece of research. So it's not just that you're doing the project, but you're learning about yourself and taking the time to think about that and your own growth. So I think that's where we're headed, as well as increasing the numbers and also trying to increase that reflection.
And then, this probably is for all 3 of you. We talked a little bit kind of all night about why to do research and kind of what you learned from it as you went through this process. But if there's somebody out there who's watching that is maybe a little unsure of, should I do this? I don't even know where to start with my project. What kind of advice would you maybe give to them? And Ben, I'll start with you this time.
Advice on where to start with the project. So I would say that definitely getting connected with a professor is step 1, because all the professors here do their own research. They have their own research interests. And for me personally, I knew I was interested in aggression. That's kind of why I joined the lab I'm in, and also social components with aggression. And then it was just meeting with Dr. FVN and discussing my interests with her, and then her, discussing her interests with me. And then we kind of bounce back off of each other. And me just telling her, look, this is what I want to do. I want to measure masculinity. How can I do this with what we already have, studied or looked at? So yeah, I guess just getting started with a professor, big step 1, and just expressing your interests. Don't be shy, don't be scared, don't hold anything back. If you want to do something, ask the professor, and who knows, you might be able to.
All right, that's a great answer. Jake, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, Ben said it fantastically. It just find something you're excited about. Sports is not the first thing that I think a lot of people think of when it's like, I want to do math research. But certainly in math, and I'm sure that it's the same case in a lot of different fields, you can work other interests into your research by applying whatever methods your discipline uses, thinks are best, whatever, that there's lots of different directions that you can go in, even if it's not the most academic sounding thing on the face. And given the depth you're going to go into on your topic, it has to be something you're interested in to really do the job that you want to do, that the other people want you to do. So figure out something that you're really excited about, and then look at how you can fit that into the field of research you want to go into.
And Dr. Lassiter, anything to add to what Ben and Jake said?
I won't say it as eloquently as they did. Yeah, finding that passion and finding a faculty mentor. It could be somebody you've had in class. It could be somebody you've had in a lab. It could be just browsing through the department's website and seeing, oh, they're doing something I'm kind of interested in. Email the professor and say, hey, I saw on the website you do research in so-and-so. Can we talk about it sometime? We love to talk about our research. Sure, come on in. I mean, we'll geek out about it. It's our research too. And get that dialogue going about, well, I'm interested in this and I'm interested in this, and we're going back and forth with the students and figuring out a project we can do together. You know, from a faculty perspective, if I have a student that comes in their freshman or early sophomore year and they work with me until they graduate that senior year, they become almost like a colleague in the discipline because the other professors in my department aren't doing research on those topics. And so we end up bouncing ideas off one another that end up changing my research direction. You know, it's fantastic, the synergy that can happen.
Yeah. And I just one more question before I conclude for the evening. And Dr. Lassiter, this one's maybe a little bit more for you. What do you think is probably the most common thing that's sort of misunderstood about research? And what is something that maybe you want to leave the viewers with knowing to think about?
Yeah, I think the number one thing I see is I can't do it. None of us could do the research when we started, right? You learn the techniques, even if you don't know the tools that you need to do the research. You saw that today where the students were kind of working through the tools that they needed. You work with the faculty mentor to figure out a way to move forward and ask the question and try to get it an answer. Again, it's trying to explain the human condition, whether that's through the humanities, the social sciences, or the sciences. Whatever your interests are, you can do research in it. It's just finding that passion in yourself and finding that faculty mentor that you can work together with to develop it.
Well, you know, this has been a really great evening. I want to thank all of you for attending tonight. Dr. Lassiter, Bella, who had to leave early, Jake and Ben. I've learned so much, and I can only imagine that our viewers have as well. I just also want to let our audience know that you can view all of our previous events on this YouTube channel, and this presentation will be available tomorrow, so you can watch it again or share it with your friends if you like. You can also keep up with our future events by heading to roanoke.edu/alumni. And then you also want to make sure you check out the main events calendar on the Roanoke College webpage for any on-campus or other virtual events that are coming up. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us, and I hope you have a good evening.